We are back with another episode of Second Opinion. Today I have Tony Cueva Bravo, who is a venture partner at Hustle Fund, along with many other ventures. He has deep experience in both startup operations as well as venture capital. He specializes in fintech and healthcare and has a really good eye for go-to-market and has looked at tons and tons of pitch decks. I'm really pumped to have him here to share his insights as we go through a real pitch deck that was submitted to our team by a company called Airstrike. Tony, thanks for joining us. Why don't you say hello?
Well, hello, Alex. Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate being here.
Yeah, man. All right. Well, let's get into it. Airstate, helping engineers ship real-time experiences way faster.
So we have like here building real-time features and experiences is still too cumbersome, too fragile, and often too complex. Okay, next slide. Complexity takes time, scaling multiple panes, serverless equal incompatible, and there's some sources regarding like what is the time that usually engineers take to achieve the first version and helping like how much does it cost and what is talking about Lambda, who is by AWS, designing for this type of execution and compatibility in terms of serverless. Next. So these are free approaches of the current state of quo. I seen that there's like pulling, checking for the service every few seconds, which is, I think, like a very cumbersome way to check it out. The real-time updates to yourself. It seems like there's some packages and technologies like WS, Party Kit, PubNub, but probably they are from the 90s, so it's pretty much outdated technology. And then we have BAS, which is Firebase and Subbase. The new incumbents, will say, because they are still, well, Subbase considered startup, Firebase by Google. So these are pretty much the status quo that we have. And basically, I assume that most of the time, because I haven't heard about pulling and DIY, I am sure that BAS is the way to go for most of the time for this type of engineers. Yeah. Next slide. Thank you. So they are building open source SDK that make building real-time experiences intuitive. Okay, so SDK, if I'm not that technical, but I understand that SDK is just like a program that actually is kind of like have a set of rules that actually could copy for multiple purposes. So it can give you kind of like a set of code that actually you can replicate and build a feature faster, right? So that's the way that and you can use many languages like React or programming languages like React or JavaScript, etc., etc., etc. So they're trying to build this particular feature, which is real-time experiences. What that does it mean? I mean, you need to be more technical. That could be, for example, sharing content on the web, like Notion, Figma, etc. So they are trying to build sort of that features for engineers of a typical startup.
I think the key is the real-time experiences, and without like more of a business case until now, it still feels a little ambiguous because I'm not exactly sure what that means, but I know it's critical to understanding the story so far. So let's see if they
And
clarify.
just a point there is like sometimes founders they just share this kind of like definitions without knowing who is gonna be like if the investor actually knows about them, right? Because they kind of like see like they might know because they are probably technical or they assume that you know anything, and sometimes that could be a problem because some investors they might not be that technical and they are questioning about like, hey, if this what type of company are they building actually, or what type of features are we are talking about, right? And they're probably you know
Exactly. It's important to just be optimizing for like your worst viewer, the worst reader, the one that, doesn't understand as much as you understand because the people that are more technical and more experienced with, certain terminology, they'll get it regardless, but you never know who's on the other side of the deck, and so I agree. I think making that clear, especially on something that's a little bit more technical, is pretty critical. But let's see if they make it clear in the next few slides.
Okay, so these are the features that they are building a shared presence. The people that are looking at the same thing with their cursor and their changes that are made, and they're putting some comps, which is pitch.com, Notion, multiplayer. These comps is not like they're replacing, it's just like making a suggestion of what type of apps you can build with these features, right? So that's kind of like what I'm assuming because they are building this SDK for that particular use case. And share state, every user sees the same data sync in real time. So Google does, Figma. So every time that someone does an edit, it appears on my screen or Alex's screen, for the case being. And they are saying like, oh, coming soon, we are talking about messaging, streaming, and how these updates are changing, the status of the updates are changing on real time. And they have other like features on the roadmap that is talking about comment notification and audio and video chat.
So it's starting to come together now.
So here's a scenario in terms of like the challenges that their ICP are facing. Is an AI API calls take a while. So and they're saying like server state is actually solving this problem. And then challenge two, the magic happens as well, which is the server state is solving. But here's kind of like something, my first piece of criticism is that why you're using for something that you haven't built yet. So it's just like, okay, I understand that there's a vision on a future and you are actually trying to surf the AI wave because I see like AI explaining the AI slide, and they say like, yes, this is the AI slide that you're looking for. Actually, probably some like points decrease in a way because I think like they want to be a kind of like a pleaser, right? Like I don't want that. I just want to see like how this evolves and probably in the roadmap you can tell better. But anyway, it's just like my first impression based on this, what I'm seeing.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there is a time and a place for future facing apps, and I think we still need to wrap our head around the current state today. But yeah, I totally agree. Let's see the next one.
So monetization, very important because they are open source. People can actually self-host and do the DevOps expertise. And also they have that's on the right side, right? Open source is free, so people that actually can understand how to host this on their servers. And also they have an option when they can allow the self-host in their own cloud. This is the typical monetization path for all the open source projects that I know and I'm familiar with because you are not that technical. So I'm gonna self-host for you and you're gonna charge you a subscription based model, which is like $24 per month, and they have some usage based add-ons based on the store and the data store and data transfer.
Yeah, I'm curious just with your background and go to market. Like when I look at something like this, I feel like business model and monetization is the kind of thing that makes sense if you're a later stage company after I understand your traction. And I don't know the traction yet. I don't know what stage they're at yet. And so I feel like it's the kind of thing that if they're super early stage, it's the kind of thing that will change and evolve over time. And I don't care that much about it. But, given your background, I'm curious, like, if this is something that you would spend more time on, basically.
Yeah, I think that's a good point of how the pricing evolves when you are an early stage startup. I think I will prefer for the founders to build a first pricing model anyway, just to know the rationale about how do they want to monetize it and how these are going to like how the monetization actually relates to the market size, right? Because I mean, we haven't seen the market size slide yet, but sometimes when you said like the number of developers who can use this times, the pricing, we can see the TAM, right? The total addressable market. Therefore, we can see if the TAM is real or not, or they're actually saying nonsense, right? So if the market size can allow this type of pricing model, then of course that makes sense. But if they put like an outrageous number and I don't see a logic behind it, then that's a red flag.
Yeah, super well said. You're helping me craft my own thesis around these pricing and monetization slides because I feel like I agree. There just needs to be a little bit more context for me to even care about this, and maybe it's a combination of traction and or we need to know what the market size is and work backwards to better understand does this monetization model actually work with the market size. But just kind of like right after you talk about the product, talking about the pricing, I start kind of thinking maybe we're getting ahead of ourselves, but let's see if they kind of satisfy the rest of our needs later in the deck.
Well, that I mean, that has partially answered your question. We are still looking for the roadmap, the pro roadmap, but not the traction so far. My first impression when I don't see traction like early in the deck is that they don't have any traction and they are pretty early. So or they just like start to monetize yet because they haven't monetized yet. So they are figuring out monetization, and we can see that say like Q3 they're gonna start monetization, right? So they are gonna enable monetization. So they are trying to see first, like, and this is typical of open source projects. So I give them the benefit of the doubt regarding like, hey, we are optimizing for stars. For you're familiar with GitHub. I'm a bit familiar, so it's just like, hey, I'm monetizing for stars, for mentions, for issues, for those kind of like metrics that involve the project itself, and see how like robust or how is the initial attention of the dev towards the project, and that actually kind of good reputation. So then to actually start monetization and say like, hey, we have build a community, because this is more like a community led type of approach, that you say like, oh, I have this beautiful project, it's open source, everybody need to use it, give me feedback. And then eventually you start like people liking, a star is equal to like. And then when the stars are coming up, you are trending on GitHub, and many people start like, oh, let me issue a change, or let me push on changes in the project because I want to perfect it. And of course, like, you start seeing like community led actions that actually gonna improve your project, because they say like, oh, this is an MIT license, which is like saying like, oh, this is free, let me help to build your project. And then eventually when you reach that good momentum, with this all like actions from the community, and then eventually you start monetize, and then start like charging, and developing your GT motion, etc., etc., etc. So I think like they are in this stage or inflection point where they are just release, because I say open source launch in Q2.
Yeah.
We are just ending Q2. So, which I, in this case, I would love to see what they have done in the Q2, the result for that launch, the number of stars, etc., and see if they actually achieve something. And if they didn't, or they do, or they did, or they didn't, what happened, right? Like, what went wrong, what went right? Because I think great founders, when they are transparent about their experiments and what they did, is actually give me more confidence on betting on that startup,
Yeah.
right? If
Yeah.
you put in a lot of great, I mean, you're just like being kind of like secretaries, like, you don't want to tell much because you want a check for me, and
Exactly.
eventually you don't want to just disclose everything, that everything going bad. I see what you're trying to do, but it's also, it's not gonna land well, actually. I prefer transparency first,
It's so rare. I feel like it's so hard when you're in like the moment of like trying to convince people to take a meeting to, kind of show some vulnerabilities on the trials and tribulations that even VCs and everyone knows are part of the founder journey. But the rare people that, feel confident enough to share, things that make them feel vulnerable immediately just advance the credibility of their pitch. Right away you're just like, oh wow, they said something that most founders wouldn't say about, a challenge that they faced. And now all of a sudden I actually trust everything else that they're saying in the deck. So it's an interesting tactic that I think it's super well said. And then the other thing that I love that you kind of went through is basically, with the last two slides, they're just giving us a couple ingredients, a pricing model, a business model, a product roadmap. And when you're talking about it, you're talking about, how do you turn those pieces into a story and actually deliver that to somebody so they don't have to figure it out for themselves, which you did and you spoke to really well. But if they were to just basically say, the story that we want to tell is that we want to, launch open source, build this groundswell, grassroots movement and excitement on GitHub, and then start layering on this pricing model that we'll talk about after we tell you our strategy. That actually, just optimizes for like people's, clear takeaway, which is the takeaway that you got. But you've been thinking about this, and you're thinking deeply about this because we're on a call right now. But if you were skimming through this, you might miss that critical component. And so, those 2 points are really well taken. I think it's, looking to kind of weave everything into a story that people can remember, and also, considering using vulnerability as a way to improve your credibility across the whole deck. I really love the takeaways there.
And just one extra point to add on what you said is like you share the key takeaways of what you have learned from Q2 to Q3, right? Like from that launch and from those like steps of the story that you are telling me, I'm gonna realize how much effort do you make, but also what if you're coachable and you can iterate from failure, because sometimes things don't come to your way. Like it's gonna fail. You need to embrace that failure quickly and need to have like a plan B, a plan C, a plan D, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I just want to know if you learn from your mistakes and iterate from those and then start like learning fast enough to get to the pace that you need to be when you actually enable monetization, like add more features, because it's not about only adding more features, it's all about understanding what your customer want.
Yeah.
And maybe they just want the two features and that's it for now. So don't need to oversell me something that they haven't experienced yet. You know what I'm saying?
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, I mean that's what venture is about. It's not you're not just investing in an asset that you blindly put money into and hope that it turns into more money. You're investing in a team, people, a vision, and that thing, changes over time, and they need to be resilient and be able to navigate the challenges that they will face. So I think it's just super well said. It's very important to, venture capital in general. So yeah, I love it. Let's check out the next one.
So right now they are telling me who is their DL customer. So they are saying about an age, range, and role, kind of like the org, And I think like sometimes they are very broadly. For example, location US, India, UAE is kind of like pretty much say like global. So I really want to narrow it down to maybe a geo and like startups that probably are Series A because they have the budget or they need to develop it from scratch. Because I think like when you narrow it down to a niche, you get what you're actually doing, and sometimes getting like a broader audience, you're gonna receive mixed signals from
Yeah.
them. Because if they are not a fit, they will tell you what they think, and that probably can add more noise than signal, and eventually you're gonna believe that that's the truth, and then you're gonna fail miserably, right? So I believe that sometimes it's better to have less than more right now. So yeah, that's kind of my take here on this
100%.
ideal customer.
100%. Yeah, I agree. I feel like, yeah, this it's interesting because this slide, I think, kind of is just like unnecessary because exactly as you said, it's like I kind of already understood that this is a tool for engineering teams who want to ship products, and it's very broad. It's not like it's giving us a unique insight. And what's funny about it is that it's like the only black slide in the deck, so it feels like it should be like an important moment that I need to like really think about. And in reality, I think it's probably the most replaceable slide that we've seen so far. So it's just an interesting choice. I mean, I do think that, everything you said is true. And it's just funny that this is like the standout black slide transition moment. I think it hurts the deck even more. But yeah.
They could use this for actually telling the traction, but of course, because they don't have traction yet, I think like they're trying to emphasize that we are have a clear focus on a particular customer. But I think sometimes some founders they overdo and they create slice of life because they think like more is better,
Yeah.
and sometimes less is better. To be honest, like to be like less than 10 slides is actually for me optimal, because I know that if I want the meeting with them, I gonna need more insights, right? More questions.
Yeah.
So that's what I want, like to be intrigued, but not have a like overload of information. So I'd avoid like say, oh, I know everything. I don't want to meet them, right? So I don't see the purpose to meeting them because I already have all the content that I need to make a decision of a yes or no right now.
Exactly, exactly. These are a lot of box checking slides, and the more box checking slides you have, the longer it gets and the less effective it ultimately will be. So totally, totally agree.
Well, here's the TAM that we were describing beforehand regarding like how the market size is tied with the pricing model. I think like they put in like, hey, 47 million developers on Earth. That's the TAM. 49 are pro engineers, which is the ICP, and then they spend like 1,000 a year. Well, yes, per dev per year on infra. So they're assuming that that cost is gonna be allocated to their tool. So that's the rationale that they have regarding like the $24 per month. And you can tell like they are around, I think, 300 a year, if I did the math correctly, but 360 or something like that. But I don't know if they're gonna replace. I mean, they're trying to say like I'm replacing the effort of building that from scratch, and that effort is kind of like 1,000 per dev. But I don't know if that's fair to say, because that probably I would love to like tap into that number. How do they reach to that like 200 to 1,000 dev per year, like cost in infra? Because that probably they're putting the the, the salary costs, or another variable cost, like fixed and variable costs that involve like hiring a developer and also maintaining the features and the changes. So they're assuming that that costs are going directly to uh, Airstate, and they're going to replace that. But for me, I want to understand like the cost benefit.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was not clear how do they go to that number, and why they are assuming that this 1,000 is that per year on infra they're going to spend are going to allocate to our state or not.
Exactly. Yeah. I totally agree. I think it's funny because like they go about this like somewhat convoluted bottoms up market sizing approach that I think like ultimately doesn't really serve them, because oftentimes you talk to investors like the only thing, especially at this early stage, that investors need to know is that this has potential to return the fund. And so the market size needs to be sufficiently large for this to be a venture backable opportunity. And I think, a sub $1 billion TAM number, especially when you're going to bring it all the way down to, your obtainable opportunity, could actually, kind of turn some people off, because it just doesn't feel necessarily sufficiently large for this to be like a true fund returner. When we could look at other examples of tools that are development infrastructure tools that have been able to kind of create multi-billion-dollar valuations. So it's funny, like there's different ways to kind of develop your market size story, and I think they chose one that is confusing and also doesn't really serve them. Whereas I think that there could be simpler ways that also, could serve them even better. Maybe just looking at other companies that they're looking to aspire to either take market share from, or show that this company in the previous cycle was able to be a multi-billion-dollar outcome, and we have, similar dynamics, or, are biting off a similar, piece of the pie. So yeah, I think that's the other funny thing, is that, it's not only just confusing, but I'm not sure it fully serves, the purpose of showing that this is like a, venture scale opportunity. So
Yeah, 100% agree with your take. And I think like uh, here they just like we love to get more clarity on the number, and that will actually give me more sense of how do they reach to that TAM. But looking to the obtainable opportunity, you can see like 30 millions. That's not sexy at all. And there's also a typo on the 250. There's a missing of an M, but
yeah,
those small details also matter. So yeah,
totally,
spot.
totally.
So we have a GTM table. I'm talking about how they are the GTM approach. Um, I understand that they are trying to say like, hey, we are doing a founder-led content, like thought leadership type of approach, so they can actually, tap into their networks, try to get the early adopters, and then start from there. Like, oh, we talk to them, and then letting them fidget, and then hand holding white glove service. That's the process for the 0 to 100 users, and then they started to add in adding on more layers on that approach. Yeah, I think it's just very self-explanatory, and I believe that they have thought in different possibilities, which is good. But it's still like I would love to get to know more about what they have learned in this launch, because I believe every plan sounds perfect, until you get hit uh, to the face. You know, you
Mhm.
can receive a punch to the face, and then you hear reality. And I don't know, I'm paraphrasing this common phrase, but I'm just saying like it's nothing is perfect until you prove it, and they haven't proved it yet. And we are in slide 12. What they have done, they just telling me what they think they can do with this SDK, but what I want to know is what they have done.
Yeah, if anything, they're proving to us that they've done a lot of thinking about what they could do. But I totally agree. I mean, we're getting to slide 12 in the deck. We've seen a handful of kind of box checking slides. We may have lost our interest at this point already, and we're still getting slides that, just feel like they're thought exercises instead of, stone cold, this is what we've done, this is who we are, that type of stuff. So I totally agree. I think we're losing it here in this little arc of the slide. Let's see if they turn it around in the last couple slides here.
Yeah, this is a competitive landscape. They're saying that there are some notable competitors and they have done the research regarding like why they are doing better than them. That's good. I think like having some sort of like sense of what you are, how the differentiation of from other investors, sorry, other companies are good. But yeah, I still want to learn, about like the company more. Like I think this is a solid checking box of the competitive landscape. So to know like, oh, there's some, data points already in the market that they are doing, that they are thriving. This is what we are different from them, and that's how we're gonna win. So yeah, that's pretty much what I seen here in this slide.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a good one. My only like just thing is, like it's helpful to see that there's other companies in the space raising capital and there's a lot of interest from VCs. But this one, Ably, I've never heard of it. Apparently, they've raised 82.3 million in funding, and we're seeing that they're proven to scale well. They have a proprietary but not open source product, but they could have better tutorials. And I think like a couple things would need to be true for me not to think, there's this very well funded competitor that we're really only going to compete with them on better tutorials potentially. Is number one, we have to make a stronger case for why open source is the only way, and either make a stronger case that tutorials is so critical to the true success of a company and is hard for a super well funded company to make better tutorials for this to feel like we have something defensible. So I think that the rationale here just needs to be a little bit tighter and a little stronger so that I don't actually read the slide and get concerned about the competitors. I'm curious if you thought the same.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. And let me double down on what happened if Ably actually open source their solution, or they launch an open source solution, right? And they actually kind of like release that to the public based on the success of Airstate. Therefore, you have, you lose your competitive edge because you say like, oh, I am open source, they are not, but they release one because they have all the funding in the world compared to yours. So that's actually something that I will not double click too much about proprietary versus no open source, because I don't think it's a competitive advantage unless you guys have the number one open source project in this field, you know? So yeah, I agree with your point.
I totally agree. I totally agree. I think this just needs to be tighter and more about like an approach that wouldn't change. But I agree. Like, they could easily make better tutorials in open source with more funding if you start gaining traction. And that's why I think like traction and, what you've been able to achieve becomes even more and more important.
Yeah, and some just parallels with what is going on. And sorry, but just to read some parallels with the AI IDE ecosystem. Like Amazon has launched their own AI IDE, like trying to beat Cursor, and Windsor has been acquired with Cognition, like, and so on. So there's gonna be more and more players that they see. Oh, this is open source. I'm gonna fork. I'm gonna do it better. So that's kind of like a good example of how market signals that we have right now is actually could happen.
Exactly. If you start doing well, well-funded competitors will come into the space. And so you have to, think about defensibility. I totally agree. All right, let's cruise through the last couple and then we can talk high level. So they now talk about open source.
Yes, so they're saying that they're de-risking our users tab by increasing adoption. What I mentioned is like people like value open source and they want to be like a community towards this open source project so they can actually say like everybody's using it now. We are building, a monetization layer so that we can actually, start our monetization path and so on. And like, hey, our paid cloud is more affordable than free, so people that actually sell hosts could be more complicated. So that's why they have an edge, like if they put a subscription. But I mean, this is just like, and they are putting like we are going the post hoc route, which is like a very famous startup in the PM world. So that's kind of like a comparison, and I agree they use that route and they actually become more like a close product because they started like monetization super early, but they became very successful because they have built a community very fast. So that's why I really want to know what they have done because I repeat myself many, many times, but that's the point. Like if they tell me we have some comparables of other successful open open source projects, okay, but where you are in that comparison, so I can tell like if you're looking the same,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, 100%, 100%. I think a lot of this, will underpin a track record and traction and, being in the real world. And I think that sums up a lot of the feedback here. But let's see. There's I think two more slides. We'll get through and we can talk high level.
Yes, this is our the team, the CTO, the CEO. They seem that they have experience in some startups and corporations. Okay, next slide. And they are fundraising 250K for 18 months from runway. Wow, that's very little for 18 months for runway. I don't know how much they're gonna. Well, here we have the breakdown of how much they want to spend. 71% on salaries.
Yeah.
But I think that that's not a very sufficient round, to be honest,
Yeah.
to actually get to the finish line. So I don't know what your thoughts about it too. I want to learn what are you thinking
Not
of the
love
250.
I love the take because I think it's very counterintuitive, especially I mean, I think at this point we can kind of both agree, having read this deck, that this is probably the first round of funding and it's a super early stage concept. They haven't even kind of gotten the open source product into market yet. And so I think like this is such an important point because it's counterintuitive when a team is likely raising their first round of capital to kind of assume that they want to make it really easy for investors and not raise too much and keep the numbers low and reasonable. But your reaction is one that I've seen a lot of investors give and surprise a bunch of founders that in reality you have to know what you want, and raising a sufficient amount of capital actually feels much more protected from an investor's lens than raising not enough capital and fearing that my check's just going to go nowhere because they didn't raise enough and then they're going to have to raise again, and what if the open source doesn't work in the right way, and what if they run into some challenges and the traction's not good. So I think it's such an important point for founders to hear is don't under raise, certainly don't try to over raise, but certainly don't try to under raise, because I think that raises a bunch of red flags, and it's counterintuitive for many people. So it's good to call that out.
Yeah, definitely.
So we gave a lot of our thoughts as we were going through this. I'd love, Tony, two things. Number one, would you, having read this deck, be interested enough to take a first meeting with this team? And then if yes or if no, why?
Yeah, I think after reviewing the deck together and put my thoughts out there, I decided to not take the meeting because of some multiple factors, right? Like one of the things that I was being repetitive, but I think it's very mandatory to share is what has been your progress so far with this open source. I think you said like you launched it on Q2. We are actually wrapping up Q2. So pretty much what you have learned, what you have accomplished in that launch, in that product roadmap, I think was slide 12 or whatsoever, but don't worry, you don't need to share it. But the point here is like, what have you learned? What went wrong? What can you do better? And that actually gave me a sense of if the founder is coachable, if the founders actually learn fast, if the founder actually knows learn from mistakes and then eventually iterate faster. So the progress they're gonna do is gonna be double next time that they try a new hypothesis. And I think that's what it lacks the substance that I was looking for some technical funder, which is, I agree, sometimes technical funders, they just launch things and they say like, hey, we understand the market, we are very good, but they haven't demonstrated results, which is important too, and therefore those results, what, because they are not disclosed, there's no disclose of the results, they eventually, I don't know what the state of the startup so far, so therefore it doesn't engage my interest in terms of like doing a first meeting.
Yeah. Yeah, totally agree. I think like especially, after we kind of wound through it, like we both agree that a lot of the success of this is going to, kind of rely on that first open source launch. And I feel like, because of that, we need to know about what they've been able to accomplish in order to tell if we want to pour fuel on the fire or not. And so I think that the right answer for now would be to have them come back to us after they've, got that launch. And then ideally, they're actually going to have a better valuation and raise more capital, but at least have something that's a little bit more vetted. And so I think like, they're out fundraising right now. Before they have that early stage traction, we would need some clear rationale as to why they absolutely need the 250K to get to that initial place where they need to go. Until then, I think that they need to really just, get this thing into people's hands and show us what people are saying about it. It's easy to, it's much cheaper to build software than it ever has been. And, the time is ripe to, actually get this into people's hands and show us some results. And then we'd be willing to probably pay a premium on the valuation that they're clearly looking for, because we'll have some confidence that this team can execute. So I think it's a very, very important point and probably the main takeaway.
I think that they have a structure, a good plan, but they haven't executed yet. So they it's like looking to the plan and how it's gonna unfold, but with no execution, I will not bet right now that you guys are actually doing okay. So if you're not doing okay, what's going on, right? So I agree with your take that, hey, we're gonna revisit this deal later when you guys have accomplished X, Y, Z, and then eventually, if that led to a premium valuation, let it be, but it will be better for both parts to sync up later in the year when the founders are best suited with more clarity of thought about what they have accomplished, what they have built, and actually fewer slides are actually better, because that gonna lead to more understanding of what they are building and what they're actually hearing from customers, and then eventually led to a potential meeting.
Yeah, great plan. Go execute on it and come back to us when we've seen some execution. 100% agree. And I think it's important to note, we were talking about this before the call, that this is clearly, as we got through it, this is just an idea. And they have a lot of, obviously they've built some stuff out. It's still, there's a lot of theory in here, but the deck is actually quite professional looking. And so we're taking it seriously, even though it's clear that they don't necessarily have much traction and it's maybe not a business yet. They're getting us to actually take it a little bit more seriously than if the deck wasn't as kind of high polish as it currently is. So I do think that there is something to be said for they're putting their best foot forward. They're doing a lot of the right things. The deck is not terrible. It's not like I'm going to throw it out the second I look at it. We're taking it seriously. But now that we understand the business, let's go see you turn it into a business and then come back to us when you have some results. That's I think a good, kind of positive spin on what we saw. But yeah.
Awesome.
Cool, man.
Well said.
Yeah, really appreciate you taking the time. This was really fun, super deep dive, but I think everything that you said was such good insight for people, especially at the early stage, looking to, kind of get a meeting with people just like you. So I think like this has been invaluable. Thank you so much. And we'll be back with another episode in the near future.